of this is in your book.
All of this is in my book, yes.
And speaking of books, you have your barbecue book coming out this year.
Yeah, so in April, my latest book is called Black Smoke, African Americans and Barbecue, African Americans and Barbecue in the United States. And essentially, I'm just tired of white dudes getting all the credit for barbecue. So this is the very first book that completely tells barbecue from an African American perspective. And what I do is I talk about the Native American roots in barbecue and then how that culinary knowledge gets transferred to African Americans so that for 2 centuries, African Americans were the go-to cooks for barbecue. But over time, barbecue gets redefined in a way that most recently has pushed African Americans to the margins of the barbecue story. So
How
right
does that even
now,
happen?
it's a very complicated process, but just like very quickly, essentially, it's a food media problem. So the people who create food media decide what stories are told
Hmm.
and who gets highlighted. They're not so diverse. And so if they talk to their echo chamber of non-diverse people in order to
Hmm.
find story ideas, they keep gravitating to the same people over and over and over. And so what we find is in the 1990s, this becomes a real phenomenon to the point that basically food media falls deeply in love with four kinds of white dudes who barbecue. So like the hipsters, the dudes with the tattoos, the
Hmm.
interesting glasses, the interesting facial hair. You've got the basically Bubba types. So the dudes that show up on Duck Dynasty, Moonshiners, they're all kind of the
Yeah.
same dude.
Uh-huh.
And then fine dining chefs. So a lot of white fine dining chefs have gotten into barbecue way more than they did, say, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And then you've got some people who are a combination of the above. So that all comes together in the 90s to the point where now you watch barbecue television shows, you look on media, like who's who in barbecue, you read media magazines and newspaper articles about barbecue. They're usually talking about white people.
This is true. This is true. So speaking of which, and blacks in culinary, what do you envision happening this year for the future of well, right now throughout the year, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Restaurants are suffering, and I know you cover this pretty closely. Where do you see black restaurateurs and chefs in 2021? Any predictions?
Well, I can tell you my answer today is very different than what I would have said yesterday.
Mm,
So I think with the change in control of the Senate, which is most likely right now, I think restaurants are going to get some much needed relief. I was mystified that Congress did not come to the rescue to restaurants. So I think we're going to get some decent relief. So that'll help. But you're going to see a lot of creativity. One example is Chef Edward Lee out of Louisville, Kentucky. He's come up with this idea of restaurant bonds. So there are a lot of people that actually are invested in restaurants. They want to see these restaurants survive. And so the idea is that you buy a bond, just like war bonds, right?
mhm.
You pay a certain price, and then in the future, that bond will have an increased value. So it's a way for restaurants to get money in the short term. And, they'll have to pay out at some point, but it'll just help them get through this rough patch. So you've got that going on. You've got a lot of other restaurants that are really going to hone their takeout experience, right? Because that's what it's going to be. The
Mhm.
concept of a dining room is going to be greatly diminished. In fact, probably a lot of restaurants are going to probably move out of their current spaces to be in a smaller space and just have a takeout operation. I think a lot of black restaurateurs are already poised to do well in this world because a lot of them had a significant takeout business, and that was part of their business model anyway. I think black restaurants are going to have to get really good on customer service if they're not already, because that's going to distinguish you in this market.
Why
And
has
if
it
you're not
always
on
been an issue?
yeah, you hear the stories, right? When we go to restaurants,
But
you have to
why
wait
has
for
it
it.
always been an issue, and how can we resolve that?
Oh,
Or
why? I'm
can
sorry.
we? Yes, why,
Yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah.
and can we possibly?
Well, no, I think the times are going to force that, right? So, especially with a takeout business, people are not going to want to wait forever for their food. So the people that
Hmm.
get that home so that food is ready when people arrive, I think it would behoove restaurants to kind of formulate their own takeout operation and ordering system so they're not relying on these third parties who siphon off a lot of cash that they
Hmm.
need. Um, and so I think part of it is a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're really good at making food, but maybe not so good at running a business.
Hmm.
And so one of my pleas is if there are people out there who are management consultants, good at running a business, know how to share that know-how, and you have a favorite restaurant that you see is struggling, why don't you offer to help them out? Because I think part of it is a resource problem. We know Black entrepreneurs usually don't have the resources of other entrepreneurs to
Mhm.
form that team to handle a lot of these things. And so they just need a little help. And so I think that's going to be really, really important. And I also think that, basically restaurants are going to have to up their websites and their social media game because that's how you're gonna break out. And I've noticed that a lot of Black restaurants don't have either a very functional website
Mhm.
or they have very little social media presence. And I think they're gonna have to change that because that's how people are finding businesses now. And I think you're halfway closed if you don't have
Mm.
top-notch social media and a website. And again, some of these businesses may not have the resources to do that. There are people that can help them. So again, if you have website building skills or you're good at social media, why don't you offer your services to your favorite restaurant? Help these people get through this tough time because of the pandemic, the next few months are going to be really tough. We know this already, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Okay.
those are some of my thoughts.
And they're always fabulous. So, I mean, I want to end the note, I mean, in this interview, which I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're so busy with your events and your book, and you're about to go on a book tour, I'm sure virtual,
Virtual.
of course. So I know you're planning for all these big things happening this year. Is there anything positive that you can say, um, something just super positive about the restaurant industry and where you see Black folks have fitting in?
Well, we're resilient. That's our history. So we're industrious, we're resilient, and we're going to make it through. It's going to be tough, but for those of us who are customers and want to see these restaurants survive, we just got to realize we need to support them. Now, that's going to be tough for a lot of people because people have lost their jobs,
Mhm.
they're on unemployment, other things. But for those of us who can, who have the resources to help, let's do it because that's our story. It's been ingenuity, creativity, resilience, triumph. That's our story. So let's keep it going in 2021.